lobby.
Yeah, for
I have
mine.
to start. Sorry, it's just me. I have to start it. There we go. I did it. Now they're there. Hi, everyone. I think that's good.
Yes, we have them now.
Okay, I'm going to take my off. You don't need to see my face.
There's still someone in lobby. How are we letting them in? Oh well, I'll go ahead and get started. Hi everyone, I see a lot of familiar names. So for those who don't know me, I am Jocelyn. I am the policy manager with Ignite National. Ignite is a national nonprofit that trains young women to run for office. And we have four issues that we're really focusing on in this upcoming year. The first one is women's rights. Second, civic education. Third is voting rights. Well, we have always had those three, but recently we added Census 2020. Since it's coming up, it's timely, it's very important. It's basically the foundation of our democracy system. So hence we have those four issue areas. And of course, when it comes to civic education, civic engagement, voting rights, making sure that people are voting and making sure that we have a system that encourages people to vote. That's really important. And that's why we have Rock the Vote today joining us. Rock the Vote is amazing. This is what they do, voter reg, and making sure that, people are first registering the vote, and second, and that people are voting. So they're the expert on this, and I know some of you are fellows, so some of you went through my training last week, and I know a lot of you had questions about specific states and the requirements. And Melissa from Rock the Vote is here to answer those state-specific questions. So I'll let Melissa take over. Thank you, Melissa.
Awesome. That sounds great. So before I kick things off, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who is on tonight's webinar. It is really exciting to talk to you all about voting, voter registration, and based on that, how you can run voter registration drives on your campus or in your community. A little bit of background about Rock the Vote. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit organization that has been around for about 30 years now, and our mission is building the political power of young people. My name is Melissa Wyatt. I'm Rock the Vote's Associate Director of Civic Technology and Policy. And again, really excited to talk to you all today. So before I dive into like the nitty gritty of what it's like to run a voter registration drive and our best practices and what the laws look like in different states to run a registration drive, I wanted to make sure that I mentioned National Voter Registration Day, which is actually happening next Tuesday, September 24th. So it's coming up super soon. National Voter Registration Day is a concerted effort with thousands of partners across the country to help voters get registered, mobilized, and prepared for upcoming elections. Of course, you don't have to run a voter registration drive next Tuesday specifically, but I wanted to make sure that I mentioned it because especially on social media next week, there's going to be a lot of like great conversations to join into, and it could be a really good opportunity for anyone on the call to talk about voter registration to their social media followers, join in on the conversation, and get the ball rolling with people that you know as well about, why voting is important, why it's important to register, and why civic participation in general is really critical to building our democracy and making it stronger and more representative also. So without any further ado, I will jump into all of the details about what we've learned in our 30 years at Rock the Vote about running voter registration drives and those state laws that I just mentioned. So the first thing that I wanted to run through are just like what on the ground voter registration activities could look like, and then our best practices for what the most common voter registration activities are. So when it comes to voter registration drives, typically if you have run one in the past, if you have seen one in the past, a lot of times it is tabling and canvassing. And I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned again what our best practices are and what we've learned. And so when it comes to tabling and trying to register voters, one of my best recommendations would actually be to look at existing events that might already be happening in your community or on your campus, and then try and plug in your voter registration drive to what is already happening. I think that there are two good benefits to that, and that logistically, a lot of the things are going to be kind of set up for you, and it might be a lot easier for you to get it off the ground and actually run that voter registration drive by plugging into something already happening. And then additionally, you're going to get a lot more foot traffic because people are already going to be around for things that are already happening, which really can help increase your impact and help you reach a lot more people with much less effort involved. Same kind of thing for canvassing, which is like walking around with clipboards and voter registration forms and pens and all of that stuff. I think that it's really good to, again, think about places that people might already be that could make these efforts easier. One thing that is really helpful to think about is like, where are places that people are going to be maybe like waiting in a line or have time to kill and not be in a rush? And by trying to find those places, it can be a lot easier to find more people who are willing and receptive to spend a few minutes to register to vote. And so I would think about, are there any concerts or events where people will be waiting in line to get into a venue or something as simple as that? And so when you're starting to get the gears turning about what voter registration might look like for you and those common ways that people tend to do it, I just wanted to make sure that I ran through some of what we've learned as well. And then additionally, I know that I'm guessing everyone on the call has seen all of the different debates that are going on right now, specifically with the Democratic Party working to narrow its field for the candidates that are running for the Democratic Party's nomination for president in 2020. There's a lot of natural attention going around those things. A lot of people are already watching them. And so a kind of fun and easy idea for voter registration could be, getting friends together, reserving a room on campus or at a community center, and then maybe hosting just like a simple debate watch party, and then folding voter registration into that and making sure that everybody is actually prepared and ready to participate in the primaries next year, regardless of what their affiliation is. And then a couple of other things that I wanted to flag before I start going into more details is when you're thinking about on-the-ground voter registration events specifically, it's really good to build partnerships and start thinking about community partners that may already exist in your community that also might be reaching audiences that you might not yourself. And thinking of ways that you can establish partnerships with other groups can be really helpful to, again, expand the reach of any voter registration that you want to do. And then also by working with those trusted partners, it can really help you get the buy-in and develop an ongoing relationship with the people who you're registering. And I see a question on the board. So I'll pause here. Jocelyn, did you want to ask this one, or I can too? I think that maybe you are on mute.
Yep, I was on mute. I didn't realize that it would take up the entire whiteboard, so we'll let them answer the question. I thought it was just going to be like a little side. But, good to know, learning experience for me as well. But this is exciting, and just learning about things that people have held, events that people have held. So we'll let it go for a few more seconds, and I don't want to take up all your time. Let's see. Okay. And feel free to carry over this to the chat. I'm going to end the voting, but feel free to just copy and paste it on the chat or type it up on the chat. Let's see. Is it sharing results? Oh, no. Technology, not my best friend.
It is really exciting to see this breakdown. It looks like about a third of people who voted have done voter registration activities in the past. So that's really exciting to see. And also, I hope that today's webinar is helpful to everybody who might be hosting their first registration event soon as well.
Awesome. Yeah, are you seeing the result? It says I'm sharing, supposedly I'm sharing, but let's see. I'll close this. Oops, where
I saw the 32%.
There we go. I saw that there were 32%, but I didn't get to see the results, like what people actually typed up. So let me see. Oops, here I am again. Okay, you know what? I'm stop touching this because I'm really bad at this. So Melissa, you can do this. I'm just gonna stay in my chat room.
Okay, awesome. That sounds good. And then also, if anybody has hosted specific activities in the past and you guys want to add what you did into the chat, that would be super awesome to hear about as we continue through the webinar today. Awesome. And then the next thing that I wanted to talk about before I start diving into those promised specifics about what it really looks like to what to do before, during, and after a voter registration event, I also wanted to talk about some general best practices for voter registration, both for on-the-ground in-person activities like the ones that I just mentioned, and then also any efforts that you might be doing online via social media, via email listserv to try and promote voter registration and voting as well. So the first thing when you're kind of planning out what your registration drive, event, or what a larger campaign might look like is making sure that you know your target audience super well by thinking of places where they will already be, whether it's in person or places that they're really engaged with online, trying to build in voter registration opportunities or efforts on those platforms and in the places where your target audience already is again going to be super helpful and make it easier to register more voters. Additionally, it's always great to just like set registration goals and have a really good idea for where you see the campaign going, and potentially, in addition to voter registration, other things that you might be looking to do as the election season goes on, like maybe hosting events that actually help get people to the polls when it's getting close to election day and that kind of thing. And then additionally, whether it is on the ground, as I had mentioned in the previous slide, or via online efforts, it's always great to find partners who can amplify your work and help you reach new audiences. And partnerships don't have to be anything super formal. You can even just like talk to your friends and stuff and ask them to share this information like with their friends and post it on their social media so that you are ideally reaching as many people as possible. Additionally, you guys all know your communities best, and it's really helpful to think about any key moments that exist in your communities. You know, maybe if you're in school, there's a really big event that happens every year on your campus. Maybe there is a really big event that happens in your community that would be really good to plug into. And so finding key moments in your community that might be a really good place to add voter registration and voter mobilization activities, again, just makes things so much easier and allows you to reach a lot more people in a much more organic way. And then additionally, it's always good to publicize your efforts, both before, during, and after, to make sure that everybody knows what you're doing and to also help build a lot of momentum around the campaign that you're running. Particularly if you're doing on the ground in-person events, it's really great to like take a bunch of pictures and post them and say where you're going to be so that everyone has more awareness of what's going on and you can kind of build a community and again, make sure that your registration activities are as impactful as they can be. So the next things that I wanted to talk about are things to think about before, during, and after a voter registration event. And so the first and I would say most important thing to think about when you're looking to register voters is making sure that you know your state's rules and deadlines. And so there are actually two types of things that I mean by this. First, knowing your state's deadlines for voter registration itself, making sure that any registration drives you want to host are definitely before those deadlines and not accidentally after, so that you can make sure that everybody gets on the rolls and that you have a clear timeline in mind for when you might want to host multiple events in the lead up to a deadline. And then in addition to that, a lot of states also impose regulations, rules, or restrictions around hosting a voter registration drive that might require advanced planning. And so those are really important to know in advance. I've pulled together more detailed information that we'll be sure to share out after the webinar so that you guys can reference your specific states, but I'm also going to do a quick rundown right now of the different types of requirements that exist and what types of states they are in. So the first kind of requirement that exists in several states is what's called a training requirement. And so that essentially requires you to either in person or online, depending on your state, attend almost like classes about how to run a voter registration drive, how to handle forms in the correct way. You typically receive a certification at the end, and then once that's complete, you can register voters. And so the states that have training requirements right now are Colorado. Delaware also has a training requirement if you want to use the state voter registration form. There's no training requirement for the federal form, but if you want to use the state one, you do have to get trained. Also, Maryland and Virginia have training requirements for if you want to get more than 25 voter registration forms, which if you're running a registration drive, you'll probably hit that threshold pretty quickly. And so you would want to get training in those states. New Mexico and also Texas have training requirements. In Texas, you have to become a deputy registrar and get a certification before you can do any voter registration events. And then additionally, Nebraska has a training requirement only if you want to help voters fill out their applications. You don't have to get training if you just hand them a form and then you don't help them and they hand it back to you and you submit it for them. As long as you're not actually working with them on the field, you don't have to get trained. But if you do want to kind of go to that next level of being able to answer questions and help them fill out the forms, then you will want to get training there. The next type of requirement or restriction that exists in some states is you have to actually register your registration drive with the state in advance so that they know what is happening and when and under what organization. And so the states that have registration requirements before you can actually host the drive are Colorado, Delaware, again, if you're using the state registration form, Florida, Louisiana, New Mexico. Oregon also has a registration requirement, but only if you're asking for more than 5,000 voter registration forms, so that hopefully won't apply. Or actually, maybe it hopefully will apply to you guys if you're out in Oregon and want to register that many voters. Missouri also has a requirement, but only if you are paying people or compensating them in any way who are helping you register voters. All right. Sorry, I know this is a mouthful, but I'm going to keep going. So the next type of requirement is around requesting voter registration forms. So in some states, if you're requesting like a bulk amount over a certain number of registration forms, you have to like submit formal paperwork and reasoning and documentation and stuff like that. California, Kansas, Nevada, and West Virginia have requirements that fit under this umbrella. They do vary a little bit, and again, we'll follow up with more detailed information on exactly what that looks like in your state, but just something to be aware of. A couple of other miscellaneous things that I wanted to flag that don't fit neatly under any umbrella. In Georgia, if you're hosting a voter registration drive, you are required to post a disclaimer notice that the state has available for you to download online. It basically just lets people know that they are allowed to turn in their own registration forms and they don't have to give it to you after they fill it out. In Mississippi, there's a place where you need to put your name on the state form at a voter registration drive if you've helped somebody fill it out and are submitting it for them. In South Dakota, you're required to give out your contact information to anybody who you register so that they can follow up with you if needed. Also, there are a couple of states that actually don't allow voter registration drives, and so I wanted to make sure I mentioned those too. New Hampshire and Wyoming are the two states that don't allow third parties to do registration drives. And then on top of that, North Dakota also just doesn't have voter registration at all. And so if you are in these areas, things that I might think about instead are, what are things that you can do close to election day? What are events that you can host where maybe a group of people goes to their polling place together and cast a ballot? There are definitely other ways to activate voters outside of voter registration. And if anyone has questions about how to do that, then I'm obviously available as a resource outside of this webinar to help you plan and think through what that might look like. Before I move on, there are two final states that I wanted to talk about if anybody in the webinar will be registering voters in either place. The first is Wisconsin. A couple of years ago, the voter registration drive laws were changed there, and it actually makes conducting a registration drive in Wisconsin pretty difficult. The way that it works now is you, most of the time, can only assist people in filling out their voter registration form, but you can't actually submit it for them. And so you would have to send them off with their own voter registration form. The reason for that is Wisconsin requires people to submit proof of residence with their voter registration forms. And so they would either have to give you a photocopy or make one on the spot of their proof of residence, give you that hard copy for you to submit alongside their voter registration form. And logistically, that can be really challenging. So a lot of the times it might just look like voter registration form distribution if you're doing something in Wisconsin. And then the last state that I wanted to talk about is Tennessee. There is actually no active law right now as of September 19th in Tennessee for voter registration drives. However, a pretty restrictive law was supposed to go into effect on October 1st of this year, just in a couple of weeks. There's active litigation and lawsuits against this, and there has been a preliminary injunction that is basically going to put the law on hold potentially for a little bit, but it's really unclear how things are going to shake out. If the law does go into effect, there will be training requirements. You will have to submit your contact information and sworn statements to the state. There will be disclaimer requirements, and there would also be fines for submitting a certain number of incomplete applications with maybe a field left blank or something like that, which is pretty serious. And so if anybody here on the webinar is in Tennessee and wants to conduct a voter registration drive, I am also available as an ongoing resource outside of the webinar to make sure that I can keep you posted on what the laws currently look like in Tennessee and also in any other states. So that was a lot of rules and regulations, and thank you to everybody on the webinar for bearing with me. And again, we'll follow up with that information. And so to me, that's the absolute most important piece, making sure that everything is compliant with any state laws or regulations that you might have to follow. And then once that's done, things get a lot more fun. I would say that the next thing to kind of think about is, especially if you're hosting in-person events, do you want to hand out and collect paper registration forms? Or would it be easier, particularly if your state has online voter registration, to maybe point to your state's OVR tool? Or also Rock the Vote has a voter registration tool that works across several states, which can be helpful if you are trying to reach people who might be registering in different areas. And so that's just kind of a personal decision, but something to kind of think about before your registration drive. Paper forms can be a lot easier the day of at the event, but then you do have to be concerned about submitting them and making sure that you're compliant with different state laws. Whereas if you are doing more digital efforts and have cell or Wi-Fi connection and are able to maybe set out laptops or something like that, that is a bit more logistically challenging to get started, but then there aren't any follow-up pieces that would really be required of you after that. So I just wanted to flag that as kind of options that you have, and neither one is better than the other, but it's just a choice that you guys have. And then additionally, before your event, particularly if there are any regulations in your state, make sure that you are building and training any team members who will be helping you out with your voter registration. making sure that they know how to answer frequently asked questions from voters, that they know different things to check for. I'll go into more detail about that piece later, but that's an important thing to think about before the event. And then additionally, just talking about the fact that it is happening and publicizing it in whatever venues you can, whether they're, whether it's on social media or in different Facebook groups or listservs or any type of thing, just making sure that people know where you're going to be and when, so that you can build attention around that. All right. And then my next slide is just kind of going over some best practices about what to think about during a voter registration event when it's happening. In addition to the social media promotion that you're hopefully doing before the event, it's also really helpful to maybe post an Instagram story once the event is actually happening so that people know what's going on, and capturing content so that you can share what you did and what you accomplished. Additionally, two things to really think about are checking for accuracy first, particularly if you're using paper forms. A lot of times people will mix up the date of birth and today's date boxes on the voter registration form. They might forget to sign the form at the end. There might be certain things that they accidentally leave blank that are required. I would highly recommend, even though it may feel a little weird at first, to have each voter stand with you for even 15, 30 seconds after they hand back your form, and just make sure that everything is good to go, that there aren't any corrections that need to be made, because it is a lot easier to fix those on the spot when you still have the person in front of you versus them handing the form, you looking at it a minute later, realizing something's wrong, and then trying to kind of hunt them down. So asking your registrants to just hang out for a second to make sure that their form is good to go is really important, and will make sure that everybody you collect forms for can actually get registered successfully, because any errors on the form might stop their registration from being processed after you submit it. Additionally, it is really helpful to be ready for FAQs. One thing that I'm going to talk about, we actually have resources developed for this, but a lot of times people will, not be sure which address to register at, or if they can register at their college address, for example, if they're a student. As a spoiler alert, the answer is yes, students do have the constitutional right to register at their college address, but a lot of times people will come up just asking those basic questions about the registration process. People might even ask you why voting matters. And being prepared to answer those FAQs will really help things run smoothly, and even having a printout. So again, I will provide details on where to find this at the end, but at Rock the Vote, we have actually prepared answers to a lot of the most frequently asked questions about voter registration that we found in our work, so that you can pretty much be ready to go and not have anything to worry about, and maybe just print it out and have it handy the day of the registration drive. And then additionally, also make sure that you're being proactive instead of passive when you're trying to register voters. It's really easy to get a little nervous. If you have a table, sit behind it, wait for people to come to you, but you're going to be a lot more successful if you are out in front of whatever setup that you have, if you're walking around and proactively engaging with people, and maybe, as you start talking to them, you start handing them a clipboard, and then they start filling it out automatically. And so that is really helpful. And also just by showing the passion that you have and showing your excitement when you're going out and talking to people, that energy is really contagious, and it's going to make people want to participate a lot more versus sitting behind a table with a sign up and not really saying anything to people who are walking by. So I know that might seem like a little bit of a no-brainer, but it is really easy to get nervous when you're doing this in person, especially for the first time. And so just kind of keeping that in the back of your head of that's how you're going to have the most impact is really important and helpful. All right. And so the last piece of this part of the webinar is after your event. And this is pretty straightforward, but doesn't go without saying, always make sure if you are working with any friends or volunteers who helped you put together a registration event, make sure that you thank them and make sure that they feel super valued. depending on, like the time of day, the amount of foot traffic that you're getting or anything like that, a volunteer might say, oh, I only got 5 voter registrations. And it's really important to, I think, remind everybody who was helping you how important the right to vote is and the impact that they really had, no matter how many voters they registered that day. Because like the reality, at least from my perspective, is that the right to vote has been fought for like hundreds of years in our country, and the fight for voting rights is still ongoing, like in this very moment right now. And it's really precious. And a lot of people have fought really hard for us all to have access to this. And even if somebody registered only one person, that is still like a really precious right and privilege that you're giving to somebody. And just making sure that your volunteers, that you communicate to them just how important this is and make sure that they feel really valued is an important piece of the. And make sure that you deliver any paper voter registration forms you've collected in a super timely manner to make sure that no deadlines are missed, that everything can be processed correctly. Our best practice is to submit any voter registration forms within the next 24 hours. And when you're thinking about where to submit them, particularly if people are registering in multiple locations, you will want to deliver registration forms to the appropriate local or county election official. And so making sure that you kind of sorted those things out. If someone registered in a different county, you'll want to make sure that application gets to the right county and that you're routing them in the correct manner. And then after that, I would say plan your next event, because there's never too much voter registration. And even if a deadline is coming up, there are a ton of other ways, particularly as election day approaches, to continue engaging people in your communities. And I will, especially as we approach election day 2020, continue to share resources with the Ignite team and all of that good stuff. But yeah, so without further ado, I will go into my last slide for the webinar. So at Rock the Vote, we have developed voter registration toolkits that cover a lot of the information that I went through on today's webinar in a little bit more detail. And so we have a voter registration how-to guide that covers the things that I talked about on today's webinar, but also provides even more detail, even more things that you can be thinking about, even more best practices and ideas for setting up a really good voter registration event. We also have a voter registration script that runs through how you might approach a person about registering to vote and what that conversation might look like, regardless of how they respond back to you, with a couple of different paths almost, depending on how they respond, which can be super helpful to prepare with. We also have a bunch of answers to those frequently asked questions that I had mentioned earlier in the webinar, which will hopefully make it really easy to prepare for any voter registration work. And then we also have a little handout called the 10 Golden Rules of Voter Registration. It's basically just more tips and tricks, but if you're especially working with other people on a voter registration drive, that can be really fun to run through and pass out to make sure that everybody is excited and a really positive mindset about getting people registered. So I guess with that, I saw a lot going on in the chat while I was talking, which was really exciting. I think a lot of it had to do with all of the different requirements for voter registration drives in certain states, but
and it's like I realized in the chat a lot of questions about Texas specifically. But with that being said, anyone has any question for Melissa, we'll take up to 3 questions because of the time that we have. So just anyone, whether it's state specific or a general question, this is the time. She is the expert. So anyone?
I think I see Nancy typing.
Yeah, I see Nancy typing as well. And
oh, I see even more. Awesome. And then also I know it's on the screen, but if you guys have any questions, you can feel free to email me at any time. I love this kind of stuff. Obviously, that's why I work at Rock the Vote, but particularly, as you're putting your event or campaign together. And if anything comes to mind at any point, feel free to email me. I'm more than happy to brainstorm with you about it. If there are any other team members at Rock the Vote that could potentially be helpful, I can connect you with them as well. So I'm always available as a resource.
Great. With that being said, you're still typing. You have been typing for a while. Do you have a question or? Okay. Yeah, I think someone has a question.
Okay, awesome.
We'll wait for like 1 more minute. Oh,
that's such a good, thank you. Oh my gosh. What is the best thing about my job was the question. So, oh my gosh. So many things. I would actually say that like potentially this is one of the best things about my job. And so what I mean by that is it is really rewarding and exciting to talk to other young people who really care about our democracy, who care about civic participation and want to engage their communities as well. And just seeing like the energy that you guys bring and other young people that I work with bring is like really, really exciting and is one of the most motivating pieces of my job. So yeah, that's my answer.
Awesome. Okay. Can you see the question, Melissa? This one is a little bit
Yes,
long.
I can.
Okay.
So it is about the different requirements around who can vote and how they are all different in different states, which is super correct. So I can definitely speak to this a little bit to let people know how they can vote. So one of the things Fiona specifically mentioned is homelessness. So the typical and the kind of default recommendation that I would make across states is if you are working with someone who's experiencing homelessness, the typical recommendation for where that person registers is the address that they would sleep outside each night. So regardless of whether you're experiencing homelessness, like you still can vote. And also, if there are voter ID requirements in your state or stuff like that, feel free to reach out to me with specific questions and I can give you resources about other organizations that might be operating in your state who could help with the different facets of getting somebody ready to vote who is experiencing homelessness. And then I know that some other things mentioned were people with previous convictions and stuff like that. One thing that I can also flag as maybe a resource to be sent around after the webinar, at Rock the Vote, we actually do round up all of the different state laws for who is eligible to register to vote in every state. And so if that would be helpful after the webinar, I can point to those resources. And that can kind of be before you're hosting a registration drive. That could be something that's really helpful to review in advance so that you can answer those questions as well. And then I saw Fiona also added that people experiencing homelessness can also pick up mail at places like churches, and I would second that. That's another really good idea. And then I see Stephanie's question about some recommendations for getting through social jitters or interacting with strangers. This one definitely hits close to home because I can actually be a little shy myself sometimes. The best thing that has actually worked for me is running through the voter registration script and just thinking in advance about like what do different scenarios look like, at least for me, where my jitters come through is wondering, how's this conversation going to go? What are they going to say back to me? What if I don't know how to respond or something like that? And so the best thing that I have done is just like the night before registration drive, running through my script of like, here's how I'm going to talk to people. Here's how I'm going to respond if they say that they're already registered. Here's how I'm going to respond if they're not sure. All those different kinds of things. And so that has been really helpful to me. And then also, I think, even though this isn't super concrete, just feeling really empowered about the work that I'm doing. I mean, I care a lot about civic engagement. And if you're hosting a voter registration drive, I imagine that you do too. And I think that the value that you're providing people and what they are getting in exchange for getting registered to vote is just so worth it. And it's really exciting to, again, give that privilege to somebody essentially by registering them. And so kind of using that to stay grounded and motivated about the impact that I could have has also been helpful.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Melissa. Thank you so much again for taking the time to present this to us. And again, her email address is right here at melissa@rockthevote.org. So write that down, save it. If you have any question, feel free to just send her an email. And
Definitely.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, I know it's Thursday evening. If you are from the East Coast, so it's 8 p.m. there or 9 p.m. So thank you so much for spending your evening here with us.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. Have a good night, everybody.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.